I discovered my wife's entire family is actually my own extended family. We're distant cousins. We've been married 12 years with 4 children. Imagine this. You and your wife do one of those DNA ancestry tests. Just for fun, you want to find out where your family comes from. You want to learn about your genealogy. It's a casual thing. You're not expecting anything surprising. You get your results back. You look at your family tree. You see distant relatives. You see cousin matches. You see connections you didn't know about. And then you see a match that doesn't make sense. Your wife's name appears in your DNA results. Not as a spouse, but as a relative. A cousin match. You laugh at first. It's obviously an error. The test must be wrong. But then you click deeper. You look at the shared DNA. You trace the family tree backwards. And you realize your wife is not just a cousin match. Your wife's entire family is your extended family. You've been married to a distant cousin for 12 years. You have 4 children with a distant cousin. Neither of you knew. This is a story about discovering that the foundation of your marriage, the assumption that you're unrelated, was unknowingly built on a family connection you didn't see coming. And it's about processing what that means. Okay, before I read this full story, let me give you context. This is from our Ancestry DNA and our Casual Amma. And when it was posted, it exploded because it raises questions most people never have to think about. This story covers a normal 12-year marriage, DNA ancestry testing as a routine activity, the discovery of genetic connection, the shock of realizing you're related to your spouse, the difference between incest and cousin marriage, it's legal, psychological processing of the discovery, how the children fit into this, legal implications of cousin marriage, whether the marriage changes when you know, how to tell extended family, processing identity and family connection. What's important to understand is that cousin marriage is legal in most places. First cousins, yes, but distant cousins, 5th cousin, 6th cousin, 7th cousin. This is so distant that it's basically unrelated from a genetic standpoint. But from a psychological standpoint, it changes how you see your marriage. By the end, you're going to understand why this person felt shocked. And why the question of, do we stay married? Has no simple answer. Let's get into it. I'm 46 years old. I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 12 years. We have 4 children together, ages 10, 8, 6, and 3. Before I tell you about the cousin thing, I need to describe our marriage. We're happy. Not perfect, but genuinely happy. We love each other. We're a good team. We co-parent well. We have a solid partnership. I met Sarah when I was 34 at a friend's birthday party. She was 34. We hit it off immediately. We dated for 3 years, got married, and started having kids. I'd never given much thought to our family origins before. She knew where her family was from. I knew where mine was from. They seemed unrelated in every way that mattered. Her family is from the Pacific Northwest. My family is from the South. Her family tree had always been documented. Her parents knew their genealogy going back several generations. My family was less organized about that kind of thing. We knew we had family scattered around, but nobody kept close track. When Sarah and I met, there was no alarm bell. No sense that we were connected. We were just 2 people who fell in love. Over 12 years, we built a life. We bought a house. We raised 4 kids. We became deeply intertwined in each other's extended families. Sarah's parents became like parents to me. Her siblings became like siblings to me. Her cousins became my cousins, or so I thought. I didn't feel uncomfortable around any of them. I didn't feel any red flags. Everything felt normal. I loved Sarah. I still love Sarah. The marriage feels right in every fundamental way. This is important context. The marriage was not born from a secret or a lie. It was born from 2 people genuinely not knowing they were distantly related. About 6 months ago, Sarah suggested we do one of those DNA ancestry tests. She wanted to get a more detailed picture of our heritage. She thought it would be fun for the kids to know where they came from. I agreed. We both took the test. We submitted our DNA. We waited for the results. They came back about 8 weeks later. Sarah got her results first. She looked at the family tree connections and found a bunch of distant relatives she'd never known about. She was excited. She called me over to look at the results. I looked at the screen, and I saw her name in my results. Not just listed as my wife, listed as a relative, a cousin match. I said, that's weird. Sarah said, what's weird? I said, you're showing up in my DNA results as a relative. She laughed. She said, that's probably a mistake in the system. They probably just tagged you as my spouse and it's showing up wrong. But I clicked on it. I looked at the details. The system didn't list her as my spouse. It listed her as a cousin. It calculated a relatedness percentage. It showed shared DNA. I said, no, it says you're my cousin. Sarah came over and looked at it. She said, that's impossible. But then we both started thinking. We traced the family trees. We looked at the connections. And slowly, piece by piece, we realized Sarah's family tree connected to my family tree. At what point would you have realized something was wrong? How would you react? We spent that entire night tracing the connections. We went back through both family trees. We looked at names. We looked at dates. We looked at locations, and we found it. A connection about 6-7 generations back. My great-great-great-grandmother was the sister of Sarah's great-great-great-grandfather. They had both left their home country in the 1800s. They'd settled in different parts of the United States. They'd started separate family lines. Over the course of 150 years, those family lines had expanded. They'd grown. They'd spread across the country. Sarah's family ended up in the Pacific Northwest. My family ended up in the South. They never saw each other again after their initial immigration, until their distant descendants, Sarah and I, met at a party in a city neither of our ancestors had lived in. We were distant cousins, not close cousins. Distant enough that we had no reason to suspect a connection. But we were related. I remember sitting there looking at the family tree on the screen and feeling this strange mix of emotions. Shock, obviously, but also something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Sarah was quiet. She wasn't saying anything. She was processing. Finally, she said, "So we're cousins." I said, "Technically, yes, distantly." She said, "Is that bad?" And I realized I didn't know. From a genetic standpoint, we were so distantly related that it was basically unrelated. Our children wouldn't have any genetic issues from the relationship. The incest risk was 0. From a legal standpoint, we were fine. Cousin marriage is legal everywhere in the United States. Even first cousin marriage is legal in most states. We were much more distantly related than that. From a biological standpoint, there was no problem. But from a psychological standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, from the "this is how I saw my marriage" standpoint, everything had shifted. I said, "I don't know if it's bad." "I don't think it is. Legally and biologically, we're fine. We're so distantly related that it doesn't really matter." But I didn't believe myself. Sarah said, "Do we tell anyone?" I said, "I don't know." We didn't talk much after that. We went to bed. But neither of us slept. How would you feel discovering your spouse of 12 years is a distant cousin? Would it change how you see the marriage? Over the next few days, I went through a lot of feelings. At first, I was just confused. It didn't make sense. We had no idea we were related. How could this be? Then I was in denial. It's so distant that it doesn't matter, I told myself. We're basically unrelated. But then I'd think about it differently and feel uncomfortable. I'd look at Sarah and think, she's my cousin. My wife is my cousin. And it felt weird. Not in a way that made me love her less, but in a way that made me question the foundation of our relationship. I kept thinking, if we'd known we were cousins, would we have dated? The answer was, I didn't know. Society has this arbitrary line about what's acceptable in relationships. First cousins are frowned upon in many places. Second cousins are increasingly accepted. Third cousins and beyond are basically unrelated. We were so distantly related that there was no biological risk. But the knowledge of the relationship changed something. Sarah was going through the same thing. She told me later that she'd felt this shift too. She said, "I keep looking at our wedding pictures and thinking about our relationship differently. Like, I found out something that changes the context, but doesn't change the reality." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean, we're still the same people. We still love each other. We still have 4 kids. The marriage is still valid and real. But now I know we're related. And it's like I have to process the entire relationship through a new lens." I understood exactly what she meant. This is the psychological complexity of the situation. The marriage is legal. The relationship is healthy. The genetic risk is 0. But the knowledge of the connection changes how you see the relationship. I started researching cousin marriages. I looked at the genetics. I looked at the history. I looked at the psychology. What I found? Cousin marriage was extremely common throughout history. It's still legal and practiced in most of the world. Genetic risk for cousins is minimal. First cousins have a 3-4% increased risk of genetic issues. We were much more distantly related. Psychological impact varies widely depending on culture and awareness. But I also found many people who discover they married a cousin describe feeling shocked and needing to process. It's not that anything is wrong. It's that the context shifted. I talked to Sarah about it. I said, "I think we need to just sit with this for a while. Not make any big decisions. Just process." She agreed. But processing was harder than I expected. Every time I looked at my kids, I thought about the genetic connection. Not in a way that made me think they were unhealthy or wrong, but in a way that made me hyper-aware of the family connection. My daughter has my eyes. My son has Sarah's hair. And now I'd think, They also have their mother's genes and their father's genes, and those genes are distantly related, and what does that mean? But emotionally, it meant something. If you discovered your spouse was a distant cousin, would you stay in the marriage? Would it change your feelings? Sarah and I decided we had to tell our families. We couldn't keep this secret. We told her parents first. We sat them down and explained the DNA test results. We explained the family connection. Her mother was shocked. Her father was less shocked. He said, "You know, I remember your father mentioning something about our families, having a connection years ago. I didn't think much of it at the time, but maybe he knew something." We asked his brother, Sarah's uncle, if he remembered anything. He said, "Yeah, actually, my father mentioned to me once that we might be related to a family in the South, but I never followed up on it. It was just a vague family rumor. So the connection had always been there. It had just been buried, forgotten, lost in the mists of time as families moved around and grew. Sarah's extended family took it surprisingly well. They found it interesting more than anything else. One cousin said, "So you married someone who's technically our cousin? That's kind of cool, actually. We're related to your kids in more ways than we thought." The strange part was that it actually made Sarah's family feel more connected to me. Like, suddenly, there was a biological reason for the family bond that already existed. When we told my family, the reaction was less positive. My mother was horrified. She said, "You married a cousin?" "Oh my God," my father said, "how distant?" I said, "Like 6 or 7 generations back. We're barely related." My father said, "Then what's the problem?" My mother said, "It's just weird. I don't like it." I said, "Does it change anything about the marriage? Sarah and I are still the same people. The kids are still your grandchildren. The family is still your family." My mother said, "I know, but it's still weird. It was weird for her, but she eventually accepted it." What was harder was telling my extended family. Some people were fine with it. Some people thought it was strange. Some people made uncomfortable jokes. This is one of the challenges of discovering something like this. You have to process it, but the real complication was thinking about the kids. Sarah and I had to decide, do we tell our children? Our kids are 10, 8, 6, and 3. The 2 youngest probably wouldn't understand, but the oldest 2 might. We talked to a family counselor about it. She said, "You need to think about what information serves them. Do they need to know that their parents are distantly related? And if so, how will that information affect them?" We decided to wait. The older kids are old enough to understand the concept, but not old enough to process it in a healthy way. When they're teenagers, we'll explain that their parents are distantly related, and that it's not a big deal from a genetic or legal standpoint, and that we love each other and our family is normal and healthy. But right now, they don't need to know. They don't need to process that their parents are cousins. What we did decide is that we wouldn't hide it. If they found out before we told them, we'd explain it honestly. Do you think the kids should be told? Should they know that their parents are distantly related? At what age? The big question that Sarah and I had to answer was, does this change our relationship? We went to therapy together to process it. The therapist said, "Let's talk about what the discovery means to you." I said, "It means I found out something about my wife and myself that I didn't know. And it's forcing me to reframe how I see the marriage." Sarah said, "It means our relationship has a context we didn't know about, but the relationship itself hasn't changed." The therapist said, "So the feeling is, the marriage is the same, but your understanding of the marriage is different." We both said yes. The therapist said, "That's actually really healthy. You're not denying the new information. You're not acting like it doesn't matter, but you're also recognizing that the marriage itself is still solid." Over time, Sarah and I worked through the feelings. We realized we don't have a problem with cousin marriage from a genetic or legal standpoint. We were never taught that it was culturally unacceptable, our societies just don't practice it much anymore. But we had absorbed cultural messages about it being weird or wrong. So we had to work through those cultural messages. We had to ask ourselves, why do we feel uncomfortable? And is that discomfort justified, or is it just societal conditioning? The answer was mostly societal conditioning. From an evolutionary standpoint, cousin marriage is fine. From a genetic standpoint, it's fine. From a legal standpoint, it's fine. The only issue was our own discomfort with it. And as we talked about it more, processed it more, that discomfort faded. Not completely. There's still a strangeness to it. When I think about it, I'm aware of it. But it doesn't change how I feel about Sarah. It doesn't change how I feel about our marriage. It doesn't change how I feel about our kids. We realize that we're actually in an interesting position. We've accidentally navigated something that most people never have to deal with. We've proven that a healthy, loving relationship can exist between distant cousins. We've raised 4 healthy, happy kids. We've built a real family. And now we know definitively that our relationship isn't defined by whether we're related. Our relationship is defined by how we treat each other, how we love each other, and how we show up for each other. Do you think discovering this would strengthen or weaken a marriage? What about yours? It's been about 18 months since we found out. Life is basically normal, which is surprising and reassuring. Sarah and I are still happy. We still love each other. We still have all the regular marriage stuff. Sometimes we disagree about things. Sometimes we have great times together. Sometimes we're just in the rhythm of raising kids. The cousin thing is just a fact. It's part of our story now. But it's not the story. I look at our family and I think, we're a normal family with an unusual origin story. Our kids are thriving. They're healthy, happy, developing normally. The genetic connection hasn't affected them in any way. Our marriage is solid. If anything, processing this together has made us stronger. We've had to communicate about something deep and weird, and we've done it well. My family has accepted it. My mother doesn't bring it up anymore. My father occasionally makes a joke about it, but it's not mean-spirited. Sarah's family thinks it's kind of cool. There's a sense of connection now that wasn't there before. We're literally related, so the family bonds feel more authentic somehow. What's strange is how quickly normal it became. I thought this discovery would permanently change how I see the marriage. I thought it would be this constant weight. But it's not. It's just information. Information about something that doesn't actually matter in any practical sense. I sometimes think about what would have happened if we'd known we were cousins when we met. Would we have dated? Would we have had the same connection? I think the answer is yes. The connection was real. The attraction was real. The love is real. The family connection is just a detail. Important perhaps, but not fundamental. What I've learned from this is that so much of what we think about relationships is based on social conventions that we're not even aware of. We have assumptions about who we should marry, what's acceptable, what's normal. And then something like this happens and we're forced to examine those assumptions. And what we find is, the assumptions are flexible. The rules are made up. What matters is the actual relationship, the actual people, the actual love. Our marriage is real. Our family is real. The fact that we're distantly related doesn't change that. Has this story changed how you think about relationships? About who you could marry? About the rules we follow? What I think is interesting about this story is that it reveals how much of our understanding of marriage is based on things we don't even question. We assume we know who our spouse is. We assume we know our family tree. We assume we understand our own origins. But DNA testing has revealed that many of those assumptions are wrong. There are probably thousands of people who've married someone distantly related to them without ever knowing. The difference is Sarah and I found out. And finding out forced us to examine something that most people never have to examine. Is cousin marriage okay? Legally and genetically, yes. Culturally? That depends on what culture you're in. What does the fact that we found out change about our marriage? Nothing except our awareness. I think that's the lesson here. Knowledge changes perception. But perception isn't the same as reality. Our marriage was always valid. We just didn't know about the family connection. I also think about my kids. They'll grow up knowing that their parents are distantly related. That will be part of their family story. And I hope that knowledge helps them understand something that I've come to understand. Family is complicated. Connection is complicated. Love is complicated, but those complications don't make things wrong or bad. They just make them real. Our family is real. Our love is real. Our connection is real. And the fact that we also have a genetic connection? That's just an interesting detail. I'm also grateful to have a wife who processed this with me. We could have had a very different reaction. We could have been horrified. We could have wanted a divorce. We could have hidden from the knowledge. Instead, we faced it. We talked about it. We worked through it. And our marriage is stronger for it. I don't recommend finding out your spouse is a distant cousin, but if it happens, it's not the end of the world. It's just new information to process. And processing new information is what marriage is all about, I think. So that's the story. And what makes it so interesting is that it's about something most people will never experience, but something that's becoming more common as DNA testing becomes more widespread. You marry someone, you build a life, you have kids, and then you find out you're related. What do? This man and his wife chose to stay together, to process it, to integrate it into their understanding of their relationship. And they're fine. More than fine. They're happy. I want to ask you, if you discovered your spouse was a distant cousin, what would you do? Would it change your marriage? And here's a bigger question. How much do we need to know about our origins? Is some knowledge too much? Because discovering You're married to a cousin is different from discovering something deeply wrong. It's just information, and how you handle that information shapes your life. Drop a comment and tell me, would this discovery change your marriage? Would you stay together? How would you process it? Thanks for watching. If this story made you think about family, connection, and the assumptions we make about relationships, please hit like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.